Today, let's discuss the impending collapse of Western civilization. This is The Cut and the Dry here on TLG Radio, and I'm your host, Kip Mock, here with my co-host, Isaac Lopez. So, why do I think Western civilization is on the brink of collapse? I'm not actually sure. Isaac and I haven't discussed this prior, so are we on the same page here, or am I riding solo on this one?
No, I'm riding with you. Okay. I'm riding with you.
Well, I mean, if I were you, the listener, my first thought upon hearing my bold introduction would be, societal collapse. So, Kip and Isaac are some of those prepper hillbilly conspiracy junkies. Well, perhaps.
Yeah.
But do allow me to make my case. And to do so, I'd like to start with reading Galatians 6:7, which says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap." So, in order to make my case, I'd like to discuss the seeds that America has sown.
Okay.
So, what seeds has America sown in the last 50 years? And then I'll briefly discuss what I think, based on historical seeds being sown,
right,
the harvest that was reaped.
Right.
So, here's the first major one: genocide of the unborn in abortion. So, what is the harvest of genocide? Well, we've seen that in recent centuries with Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, Chairman Mao. It's not good.
No, those do not end it well.
Yeah. Second major seed of societal collapse: sexual degeneracy of a multitude of varieties, homosexuality, pedophilia. What does a people get when that is the seed that they sow? Well, just look to Sodom and Gomorrah. Third seed: the rampant destruction of the family unit. When was the last time that we saw such avid destruction of the family unit? Well, probably in Nazi Germany, but even more so during the French Revolution. Right? To societal collapse types of times. Okay? So next, the denial of God's design in feminism, genital mutilation, so-called transgender, emasculation, the worship of self. Well, what happens when you deny God's design for you? God denies those who deny him. That's what happens. Another seed that America has sown in the last 50 years is valueless currency, paper dollars, greenbacks, fiat currency, whatever you want to call it. I'm not sure if any of you guys have ever wondered when unbacked or fiat currency was first introduced in the U.S. So I just want to talk about this. Might sound like I'm disproportionately talking about money, as I sometimes do on the show. But this is just an interesting side note. I enjoy the history of how this happened, and I think it's good insight into why I throw paper dollars on this list. So fiat currency was first introduced to the United States during the Civil War to keep Union soldiers paid. They did this because private banks of the time, of course pre-Federal Reserve days, wanted between 15 and 36% on their money, being that loans to pay soldiers in a war is risky business. So the solution for the government was, we're the government, we can print fake money. And so they did. It didn't go very well. And I mean, the Civil War already had created massive turmoil. And isn't it interesting to note that the first time that fake currency was introduced was during one of the greatest tragedies in the U.S. history. That was what caused it to happen. So the U.S. slowly transitioned back to the gold standard after the Civil War. Then in 1913, the Federal Reserve was formed, which pretty much spelled the death knell for the United States economy. But it kind of held out for a little while, went through 2 world wars, and through the 2 world wars and following foreign wars, the United States government had become far too involved in private economic business. Most obvious examples are the government taking over automotive factories to make warplanes and battleships. But the problem is, once the government intrudes, they don't step out of their mess.
Right.
They never step back completely after they make an intrusion like that. So rolling right along comes 1971, right in the middle of the Cold War, and amidst high tensions with the Middle East. We're only 2 years before the oil crisis of 1973. And at this point, the government just decided to assassinate the economy and officially annihilated backed currency, brown stamped and blue stamped paper bills, which you still see them around every once in a while. It's a bill that you can hand in for silver or gold.
Wow.
And now you can hand it in for the government's good faith, which is not something that you really want on your currency.
No, because it's not really good faith.
Yeah. So all of those green stamps in your wallet are completely meaningless, and are becoming more so with the multi-trillion dollars worth of stimulus that's just gone through. Right.
Yeah. No, I thought that point is very interesting, especially now. Like with all of the inflation that we're going to be seeing, with the money just being pumped in, the money that technically is ours, but it's now the government's because we allowed them to take it from us. Through taxes.
Right.
Anyway, that's a really interesting seed, and one that I think, not to sidetrack us, but is you look at all the other seeds, and it's like clearly sin. You kill the unborn, that's a sin. There's sexual degeneracy. The Bible explicitly states sin. And then you get to valueless currency, and I don't know if that pops into the top 3 categories in most people's heads as, that's a seed that's going to be sown, that's going to wreak havoc. And yet I think what you're pointing out is very valuable.
Yeah, and
no pun intended.
Thank you. I think that there are numerous examples like this.
Right.
This is just the first one that pops into my head, and the one that I've most felt like jumping into and explaining. Because you're right. Yeah, most of these are sin issues. What appear to be major sin issues, but theft is a major sin issue.
Yeah.
And the government's doing that all the time.
Right.
So the next seed that America has planted is the total rejection of absolute truth. And basically America as a whole has made this absolute claim that there can be no absolute claims.
Right.
Well, here's the problem. If truth is relative, then the only person's truth who matters is the person who has the power to impose their will on other people. Because moral standards are always imposed. That's how the world works.
Right.
And if there is no objective moral standard, then Stalin, his moral standard is the only one that matters because he has the ability to impose it on you.
Right.
And I do realize that I made a few leaps and bounds from just relativism to Stalin. And maybe some people fell off the train as I was going there. But take the time to think through those claims, the claim that I just made. And I think as you think through it logically, you'll realize that there is no other solution.
Right.
There is no other end.
Yeah. And this loops back to what we were discussing in our last episode with Ayn Rand, right? That's kind of where her philosophy came to a head, right? Where she thought, it comes down to 2 beings and their will. What's going to be the deciding factor between 2 people that disagree. I think you pointed that out last episode.
Yeah, because her argument is, man's reason is the be all and end all.
Right.
And then she makes the argument a couple times that when 2 men's reason conflict, the arbiter is reason, and never says who decide. The arbiter for is reality.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But she never answers the question who decides what reality is.
Yeah.
Because it could be one of the 2 men's reason.
Right.
Whichever man has a gun.
Right.
To borrow Ayn Rand's go-to. So the last seed that I'd like to discuss.
Yeah.
There are, of course, many others.
The
last one I'd like to discuss, for the purposes of my argument, is the indoctrination of children in public schools to all of the above stated ends. And even worse, often with the complacent capitulation of the church.
Right. Oof. Yeah.
Hitler did this. He did this with children. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I hope I've tried to paint a picture of some of the things that America has done in the last half century primarily.
Yeah.
To sow the seeds of destruction for its own civilization.
Right.
So here's my query to you, listener. When a nation plants the seeds of societal failure, is God mocked? God is not mocked.
Right.
That which America has sown, that will it also reap.
Mm-hmm.
Isaac, do you have anything to add? Is there anywhere you like to push back on the case I just made? Or?
No, definitely not pushing back. I mean, more it's just banging the drum for this kind of. We need more, honestly, messaging like this, because all the things that you laid out really we should turn into an episode, just working through the different seeds that we have sown, that America has sown, because I think it would be really enlightening. And it's definitely one thing that I would not even like to qualify what you said, but just like there are even more seeds, right? Like you mentioned, there are going to be there's so much to this Western civilization collapse that we just laid out, and it all stems from the people, right? And there are things that we've allowed to happen. There are things that complacency has allowed to run rampant through our cultural streets, and we didn't even get to all of them here. So there's plenty of there's plenty of work to be done, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just saying that this is really good, but there's more.
Yeah,
right. There's even more.
So if you're not convinced that Western civilization is going to collapse,
you're blind.
Stay tuned, because we'll be potentially be doing a deep dive on each of these things individually. So I'm going to consider my argument laid out. I'm going to consider all of you listening convinced. And as Francis Schaeffer put it, how shall we then live?
Amen.
There are three things that I would like to draw from impending societal collapse.
Right.
We don't know
such a cherry note.
Ooh, cherry on top. We don't know exactly what that will look like. Mm-hmm. We don't know exactly what will happen.
Right.
I know there's no way to predict exactly what's going to happen. There are any number of things in a varying degree of horrible that could happen.
Oh, I just thought of something that I would push back against.
Okay.
And this, I didn't want to get too far into your application. It's more that we could honestly make the case that the seeds that are being sown are being reaped now, and this is part of the collapse of Western civilization.
Oh yeah,
right. And I mean, I don't think that you would disagree with that. I just think that we're in the midst of having to face this collapse or destruction, because it's happening as the seeds are being sown.
Absolutely.
Like it's happening because they are being sown.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. I just think that America deserves a lot worse.
Yes.
For what it's sowing.
Cool. Sweet.
So what I mean by a lot worse is we still have running water.
Right.
We still have electricity, and yet we're murdering our babies.
Right. Don't deserve those things.
Don't deserve those things.
Yeah.
So I would like to at some point just jump into a lot of the things that I've seen in just supply chain for some of the industries I work with.
Okay.
And if you aren't convinced by what Scripture has to say, then shame on you. But I could also tell you a lot of things that have happened with the supply chain for the real estate industry, the automotive industry, the packaging industry, that are indicative of total economic collapse. One of the things that makes me convinced that America is going to get a lot worse than the bad that it is right now is the fact that through modern capitalism, we have built a house of cards, the Tower of Babel, but it's made out of cards.
Right.
And what I mean by that is every single person in the workforce, the vast majority of them, are hyper specialized. You have heart surgeons, brain surgeons, truck drivers, grocery store clerks. Every single person in the workforce knows how to do one thing and one thing only. And when you pull out just one of those cards, say the supply chain for semi-truck axles, then all of a sudden farmers aren't getting their food picked up. Grocery stores aren't getting their food delivered. Everything can collapse just with one piece of the puzzle, one card out of the tower missing. And so that's what I mean by we have a very, very fragile nation. And that wouldn't be a problem because capitalism is built to maximize each man's productivity. And that's excellent. It doesn't work when the government intervenes.
Okay. Yeah.
The government intervening
I can roll with that.
is like a battering ram being taken to a house of cards. It's going to fall over.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And when it happens, just like a house of cards, it's going to happen very quickly.
Yeah.
So, with all of that said, I hope you're thoroughly terrified.
No.
And off to buy toilet paper. Sorry. But back to how shall we then live? I think there are a few main things to draw from all of this. The first is, of course, trust God. There are a number of verses that we've read probably 15 times on this show. Romans 8:28 is one of them. I'm going to read it again.
Yeah.
And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And that includes if, you die a bloody death. I'm not saying everything is going to be happy and pleasant. But all things do work together for the good of those who love God.
Martyrs are certainly not exempt from that verse.
Exactly. So don't take that as a rosy, everything's going to be okay. But God's got your back. Even if you do die. In a painful way.
You're really hammering that home. I'm a little worried I'm the only one in the room with you right now.
The second aspect to this is pray like David. I picked a random psalm.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
that
they're all
I would
good.
like to read that I think is a great example of David's prayer. But read all of the Psalms and pray all of the Psalms. So Psalm 130 says, "Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my pleas for mercy. If you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, O Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, that you may be feared. I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen for the morning. O Israel, hope in the Lord, for with the Lord there is steadfast love, and with him is plentiful redemption, and he will redeem Israel from all his iniquities." There is so much to this psalm that encapsulates a lot of what we've said today, and a lot of what I'm going to say. So I'll say nothing more, just that read the Psalms. They're very helpful. Second, and this will be a little bit more brief of a point, the third will be a little bit lengthy. So second, how shall we then live? Don't let societal collapse be an excuse to be a bad provider. 1 Timothy 5:8 is another one of those verses we've read numerous times in the show. Gonna read it again. If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Paul doesn't give a built-in excuse for, I don't have running water or electricity anymore.
Right.
Figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get an excuse.
Yeah.
So, whatever that means for you to be prepared, and I'm not saying to build a bunker so that you can live alone. And,
yeah, quite the opposite. I mean, you've encouraged people to learn how to broaden their skills and what they can do if you're in a place where running water is not available. Say the city is not able to provide that kind of running water. You need to figure out, how am I going to be a day laborer in a field?
Yeah.
To trade. You need to be able to trade things beyond this fiat money, right?
Right. Exactly.
So I think you said it really well.
Yeah. We have discussed that in the past, and I think there's a lot more to say on it, but absolutely. I don't want to hammer it. I don't want to hammer it too hard because there's more important stuff to discuss here. Finally, and most importantly, how shall we then live? We should pray for reformation.
Amen.
And I mean this in 3 different ways. First of all, be the reformation. Make babies who love God.
Yeah.
Build his kingdom in that way. Be the reformation in your workplace, in your home, in your church. Your church should be, part of the Reformation. If it's not, find a good church. Second, pray for forgiveness and revival for the entire nation. And finally, do not be like Jonah if God does forgive our nation. And in order to kind of highlight these 3 aspects, we're going to read Jonah 3 and 4.
Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it the message that I tell you. So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, 3 days' journey in breadth. Jonah began to go into the city, going a day's journey. And he called out, Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. And the people of Nineveh believed God. They called for a fast and put on sackcloth, from the greatest of them to the least of them. The word reached the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne, removed his robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And he issued a proclamation and published through Nineveh, by the decree of the king and his nobles, Let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock taste anything. Let them not feed or drink water, but let man and beast be covered with sackcloth, and let them call out mightily to God. Let everyone turn from his evil way and from the violence that is in his hands. Who knows? God may turn and relent and turn from his fierce anger, so that we may not perish. When God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil way, God relented of the disaster that he said he would do to them, and he did not do it.
But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. And he prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? This is why I made haste to flee from Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. And the Lord said, Do you do well to be angry? Jonah went out of the city and sat to the east of the city and made a booth for himself there. He sat under it in the shade till he could see what would become of the city. Now the Lord God appointed a plant and made it come up over Jonah, that it might be a shade over his head to save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. But when the dawn came up the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant so that it withered. When the sun rose, God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on the head of Jonah so that he was faint. And he asked that he might die, and said, It is better for me to die than to live. But God said to Jonah, Do you do well to be angry for the plant? And he said, Yes, I do well to be angry, angry enough to die. And the Lord said, You pity the plant for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should not I pity Nineveh, the great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle? So, couple things to draw from this passage. First of all, in the beginning of chapter 3, Jonah goes out and he starts walking through, a city that is in bad enough shape to be condemned by God. Like 40 days and you're done.
Yeah.
And so he wanders through the streets saying, 40 days and y'all are going to die. And the people believed him.
Right.
Here's one thing that American Christians aren't doing enough of. Wandering through the streets saying, y'all are going to die.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that literally.
Right.
But do not let America... Here, let me draw this out with the end of chapter 4.
Yeah.
When God is explaining why he had pity on Nineveh, he said, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left. If that isn't an apt description of America, 300 million people who don't know their right hand from their left. They don't know men from women. They are, and a lot of them do it on purpose. A direct rebellion against God.
Right.
But a lot of them do it out of a lack of knowledge, just like the people of Nineveh. And perhaps if Christians are faithful and proclaim the gospel and proclaim the result of this trajectory, as Jonah did, then perhaps God will be merciful.
Right.
So pray for forgiveness and revival. Proclaim the results of rejecting God, as Jonah did.
Right.
And don't pout if God does forgive our nation.
Yeah.
And let me make this a little bit more real. If all of a sudden, let's say Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, two people I like picking on regularly, let's imagine that those two people become devout Christians next week. Would you be happy?
Ooh. Oh, that's good.
You should be.
Right. You should be rejoicing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that goes for people who have personally injured you. Would you be happy if they turn back to God?
Right.
You should be. And that's pretty much all we have to say today on the Cut and the Dry. Short and sweet, which is surprising. We never know when we're actually going to have
we rarely
show.
We really are.
Well, thanks so much for joining us on this episode. If you've listened to us for this long, Discord, Isaac will have the link in the description for the show.
As always, yeah.
Join us there, ask us questions, disagree with us, argue with us. We want to hear it.
Right.
We love to hear it.
Definitely.
Thanks for listening. This is Kip and Isaac on the Cut and the Dry, signing off for now.